Good afternoon. It's Monday, 1 o'clock, and welcome to the Deal Doctor live stream. We've had a lot of questions come up over the last week. Many of them are repeat questions, but it's good to have a refresher. So we're going to have a lot of stuff in different areas here. I hate to call it a mishmash of questions, but that's kind of what it is. So one of the topics that came up was, how do agents grow their business? Now, I started out by writing that question, how do new agents grow their business? Because that was a question that was mentioned specifically. But it's not just new agents who need to grow their business. This is a unique market that we are in. And so even experienced, knowledgeable agents who've been in it for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years are saying, how do I go about getting business? Well, in my perspective, you have to go back to basics. And going back to the basics means something like this. John Englehart was a 5-star agent, retired a few years ago. And John was a trainer with Greenridge before he came to 5-star. And John used to have a saying. He had a lot of sayings, and I liked him because he had these sayings that he had cut right to the heart of the matter. And he said, you got to play in traffic. If you sit on the bench on the side of the road, you're probably not going to generate any business. You got to step off the curb and get into the traffic. And that's pretty good advice, because a lot of folks, new agents, experienced agents alike, will sit back and think that the people who know them know that they're a realtor. Well, they don't, nor do they know that you want and need their business. So give your business card to everyone you know, or do business with. If you have your laundry done, dry cleaning or shirt starch, do you give your business card to the people at the counter when you walk in? I can tell you that I've gotten referrals from the guy who owned the company that starched my shirts every week. I mean, simply because I gave him a card, and I kept giving him a card. Tell them that you're a realtor and ask the open-ended question. Who do you know who is thinking about making a move this year? Now, phrase it, structure it, reframe it in any way you want, but make it open-ended. Avoid asking, do you know anyone who's going to sell their house? The answer you're going to get is a no, because asking a closed-ended question is too easy to get it off their plate by giving you a no answer right off the bat. Do you know anybody who's no? Could I add no? If I know. So, when you ask them, say, who do you know who's thinking about buying or selling? And then be quiet and listen. And very often you'll hear the wheels spinning in their brains. They're trying to think of something. They're trying to help you out. And they're going to work at it a little bit. And maybe they might not have an answer right at that moment, but you might get a call the next day or later that day or a week from now that says, you brought that question up, and as I've been thinking about it, my sister and brother-in-law are thinking about making a move. They're going to have grow their family and whatever, okay? So always ask it as an open-ended question. When I got into the business many, many years ago, I had a mentor. And there are a lot of really good mentors. There's the Mike Ferry, Tom Ferry, Floyd Wickman, Brian Buffini, Ninja. All of them are really good programs. And if you do what they tell you to do, you will generate business. And one of the things that Floyd Wickman told me when I was first in the business is, call till you get an appointment. It wasn't call for 2 hours once a day. It was call till you get an appointment. Because your only job when you're first in the business, or when you need to kickstart your business, the only job you have is to call until you get an appointment. Now, people can say, well, I have to work on my database, or I have, call till you get an appointment, because that's the way you generate business quickly. Once you've built your business, book of business, and you have that database, your focus may shift a little bit, but prospecting every day or on a regular basis, a block of time every week, is still going to be the lifeblood of your business. That's where you're going to get business for the next 10, 20 years. So right now, if you don't have business, it's the number one thing you should be doing consistently every single day, every hour of the day, until you get an appointment. Persevere. Don't give up. The people who persevere are the ones who ultimately get the business. So, as you've heard me say before, focus on getting listings. Right now, sellers don't have any excuse other than the one that's we all hear right now, which is, I don't know where I'm going to buy a house. If I were to sell mine, I don't know where to buy a house, or I can't find what I'm going to look for. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. But right now, the trees have blossomed, the leaves are on the trees, it's spring, their gardens are popping up, the flowers and all. There's no excuse for waiting any longer, like when you hear I'm going to wait for spring. I want to wait until I have the pool open. I want to wait until the tulips have come up, and so on and so forth. Though they're here, okay? It's spring. So that excuse goes away. Let me talk a little bit about that excuse that I can't find. I don't know that I'm going to be able to find what I'm looking for. If I sell, can I find something? Well, sometimes we have to reframe our thinking and flip our thinking upside down. As I talked about several weeks ago, a lot of people who are afraid of that are they're afraid that they won't be able to find something that they want if they sell their home, but they're sitting there with a ton of equity. They may have $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 of equity in their home, which they could use to go out and purchase a home under a bridge loan, for example, or even to carry two mortgages. In this market, they're not going to carry two mortgages very long, because that underlying home is going to sell if it's in reasonable condition and priced correctly. And priced correctly in this market is a really wide space, because we're getting two offers of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 more than the list price. So the likelihood that that underlying home is going to sell quickly after they've chosen and closed on another house is pretty good. The risk is lower than at any time I've ever seen in 35 years of doing this. The risk of not selling is almost non-existent if a house is in reasonably good condition and is fairly priced. And fairly priced, it's a wide span. So make sure you're working with good prospects that have a realistic price range, that they are qualified, and so on. I've told the story before about No Next, and I won't go through it again, but the realistic, if you're out there working with buyers who want a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath, less than 15 years old, I'll just pick Forest Hill Schools, for example, and they'd like it under 2.25, you're not working with a real buyer. You're working with someone from about 1978. So make sure that the people that you're working with, buyers and sellers, are realistic in their expectations and their ability to not only purchase, but also sell. Found out recently that there was actually a house that was only going to be able to be sold on a short sale, if you can believe it, in this market, that it was in such bad condition, or is in such bad condition, that they're going to have to get a short sale approval in order to sell it, because it's basically kind of a tear down. So make sure you're working with realistic clients. Otherwise, you're spinning your wheels and spending a lot of time, and you're not going to get paid for it. So another topic, mistakes, just plain old mistakes. And in the theater business, they have a saying, when you have to dress fast, dress slow. In other words, if you go off stage and you've got a costume change and you've got to be back on stage in less than a minute, slow down. Think about what you're doing. Do it methodically. Do it carefully. Because the faster you go, the more likely you are to make a mistake. So I say to you, slow down, take a breath. No matter how much pressure you're under to get an offer in, proofread your work. Double check the purchase agreement and pre-offer addendum that you've had filled out. Make sure that you've had that come into the office meeting with a buyer and they understand what the expectations are. They understand that if they reach an agreement that they're going to have to pony up an earnest deposit within a specific period of time. They understand that they're going to have to order inspections, and once that inspection window is expired, that they've accepted the property as is if they've done nothing to make a proposal. So make sure you're dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure the buyers and sellers have full and complete information in order so that they make informed decisions. And make that happen before they are under the pressure of signing an offer, because at that moment it's highly emotional. They're distracted from the pressure of needing to get an offer in. And again, go through that pre-offer addendum with them, because that will cover you in the event that they make an escalation, an appraisal gap guarantee, or they waive inspections, or any of those sort of waive survey, whatever. It protects you. Become familiar with reading and understanding title work and easements and surveys. What does it mean? If you get the title work back and you read Schedule A and Schedule B, and there are a couple of liens on there that you don't understand, call the title company, because you're going to need to understand it in order to walk through it with the buyer or the seller. Make sure that if there's an easement on the property, or if an easement has been suggested, for example, I had one recently where it said that there was deeded access to the lake in the form of an easement. Well, no, there wasn't. It was never there. There was never anything in writing. It was just a word of mouth thing that went through the years, and people relied on it as if it were written, but it was never written. So be very careful that you review the title work and understand what it says when you get it in, so that you can convey that information to your client. Had a lot of issues recently about escalation clauses. Okay, I just clapped. That always hurts Dom's ears, so I won't try not to do that again. Anyway, escalation addendum. Use the escalation addendum to clarify the final escalated price. Document. Get the final price in writing, even if it's an email, and make sure the mortgage lender and appraiser know what that final price is. Now, want to be very cautious. I know that some agents write in, I'm going to use the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement as an example for a moment. They will write in, accept it as written, and then they will write, final offer price is such and such. That technically is a counteroffer when you write in that open space. It becomes more questionable if you write final offer for clarification. This is not a counter, for clarification purposes only, the final price is. If you read the escalation clause addendum, that's what it explains, that this is not a counteroffer. It is simply a clarification of the final purchase price based on the triggering offer that you would provide. Now, if you don't do that and you haven't provided, you can't prove that you've provided the triggering offer, then it can be interpreted that the original price that the buyer made the offer at, whatever that price was, is the final price. So this can be a very, very important matter when it comes to getting down to closing, and somebody says, well, no, the price is this. Well, no, it's $40,000 more than that. Well, show us the proof. Show us the documentation that you made them aware of what the final price is. If you can't do that, there's going to be an issue. Make sure it's in writing. Make sure the lender and appraiser know what that final price is. Let's talk about subject to offers that are subject to. One that I ran into this morning is there's two properties owned by different sellers that are being purchased by one buyer. That one buyer is going to buy both properties. In that situation, the buyer doesn't want to buy just one property. They want to buy both of them from different sellers. In that particular case, both offers must be written contingent upon the simultaneous closing with the other parcel. Because if you don't have that in there, either party could decide they don't want to close, and then the buyer is left to close on this parcel, but not the other parcel, and that wasn't their intention. And it's our job to make sure that what they intend in their purchase is reflected in writing on the purchase agreement. Another one we run into a lot is, I'll say it again, cash. If the offer is written for cash, it must be cash, real cash in a demand deposit account. That's a checking account or a savings account or a money market account with somebody like Merrill Lynch or something where you can get the money out within a matter of hours. Not a home equity loan and not a gift or a loan from a relative or a friend. If the money, any part of the money, whether it's down payment or all of the purchase price, if it comes from anyone other than the buyer, it has to be, you have to declare that this offer is subject to getting the funds from, as I've said before, the National Bank of Mom and Dad, or from a home equity loan, or from cashing in a particular investment. If you don't have that language in there, and then let's say that Mom and Dad decide to change their minds and say, well, we've thought about it, we really don't want to put our money, kind of all that money toward your house, so now what do you do? Well, now you've got an offer that was made as a cash offer without that contingency, and your buyer is stuck. Your buyer and could end up losing their earnest money because it was never contingent. You never wrote it contingent upon getting money from Mom and Dad. We had one recently where Mom and Dad actually wired the money into the buyer's account so that the buyer themselves could prove that they had the cash available to proceed with the transaction. So that's another option. But if that's not going to be done, make sure that whatever contingency there is to make that cash offer is written and accepted in the purchase agreement. Okay, how are we doing? Appraisal gap guarantees. An appraisal gap guarantee does not establish a new purchase price. For example, let's say we have a $220,000 sales price, purchase price, which is agreed upon by the buyer and seller, $220,000. Let's say that there's a $10,000 appraisal gap guarantee. The appraisal comes in at $180,000. That means that appraisal gap guarantee will pay up to $190,000, right? Does that mean the seller has to sell at $190,000? And the answer is no. It doesn't establish a new appraisal, a new price. The appraisal plus the gap guarantee does not establish a new price unless it is specified as such in the purchase agreement. If the purchase agreement says, for example, if the appraisal comes in lower than purchase price, the new price shall be whatever the appraisal price is plus the appraisal gap guarantee. Now, in that situation, they would take the $190,000 appraisal, add the $10,000 to $180,000 appraisal, add the $10,000 to it, and you'd have a new price of $190,000. Again, the words in the contract matter. But if there's no stipulation that appraisal establishes a new purchase price, then the seller is not required to sell. However, let's ask it a different way. Does it allow the seller to get out of the contract simply because the appraisal came in at $180,000? What if the buyer came up with an additional $40,000? But let's pretend for a moment that the seller was sitting there with a backup offer of $240,000, and they want to get out of the deal because this $220,000 buyer, obviously they want $20,000 more. Can they do it as a result of this appraisal gap guarantee that would only give them $190,000? Well, what if that buyer comes to the window with $40,000 more than the appraisal price or the full price of $220,000? Then it doesn't give the seller the right to terminate the contract. It only allows the buyer to either get a denial or walk away based on the appraisal. It does not allow the seller to do that if the buyer can prove they have the ability to make up the difference. I hope that helps clear it up. Got this question this morning. Can a buyer write an escalation clause or an appraisal gap guarantee without a cap? In other words, no limit at all. And my answer was kind of like, yeah, and while you're at it, you can buy them a new Lamborghini. That's a really dangerous thing to do, in my opinion, to write an escalation clause or an appraisal gap guarantee that has no limit whatsoever, because you could find yourself with two competing strong-willed buyers who could run that price up ridiculous, which would be great for the seller, but not necessarily for the buyer. So I would encourage an agent who finds themselves being asked if they can, well, just write it, whatever it is, just write it. Just whatever they end up with. If they have a $750,000 piece of property on Lake Michigan and they get an offer of $1.25 million, I want you to beat it by $50,000. Okay? At what point, I think you have to ask the question, at what point are you no longer interested in this property? Is it $1.2 million? Is it $1.5 million? Is it $2 million? I don't know. Can you write an appraisal gap guarantee or escalation clause without a cap? Yes, but I think it's a very, very dangerous thing to do, and I would advise against it. And if you do that, I would encourage your client, whether no matter who it is or what price range, that they contact an attorney and have it drafted so that it protects them somehow. That's, to me, a really open-ended situation. It's like writing a blank check. Let's see how far we got here. Okay. Another question that came up was, are sellers required to write or verify that a buyer's offer has been presented if requested by the buyer's agent? The buyer's agent may request that the seller reject the offer in writing or sign an affidavit that the offer was presented. However, the seller is not obligated to do so. Seller is not obligated at all to say whether or not they received the offer. So how do you know that that offer was ever sent over by the listing agent? Well, in many cases you don't. But if you believe the offer was not presented, if you believe your offer should have been presented but wasn't, and you have some evidence or very strong suspicion that it would have been in the running if it had been presented, you can file a grievance with the association that you're involved with, that you're a member of. So I don't know of any other option, but you can ask whether or not they would sign an affidavit or just rejected on the offer and have the seller sign it, but they're not obliged to respond. Does an addendum always open up a contract for renegotiation? And the answer to that is no. A lot of agents believe that if you provide if a buyer writes an addendum of any kind and sends it to the seller, that reopens the contract, allowing the seller, for example, to terminate the contract. It doesn't. That's not true. The only places that applies are those paragraphs within the contract, within the purchase agreement, which says that's an option for them. Again, for example, in the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement, in paragraph 15, it specifically says that if the buyer writes a proposal regarding inspections, that one of the options that the seller has is to terminate the offer. Okay? That's true of the title work, survey, well and septic inspection, for example. But as an example, let's say that you're 3 weeks into a deal and the buyer sends over an addendum that says, we'd like an extension for 3 weeks. And the seller says, aha, now I can get rid of this buyer and accept the backup offer I've had in my back pocket. Well, that's not true. You can say no to that extension, and ultimately that buyer may may not be able to close within the time frame of the purchase agreement. Then you get into the question of, time is of the essence. Can the seller kill the deal because the buyer couldn't make the deadline of the contract? That's one for an attorney. That's the one where you send them off to the attorney. So as another example, a few days before the closing, the buyer sends over an addendum that says, well, we want the John Deere tractor, all the pool equipment, the patio furniture, and the dining room table. Yeah, so what? No, you don't get them. Simple as that. But it doesn't give the seller the right to terminate the contract. It doesn't open up the contract, as some people believe, for the seller to terminate the contract. So be very careful about understanding that. And the last thing I'm going to go through really quickly is we get the call a lot where a client, seller or buyer, doesn't matter, a client of somebody else, some other realtor's client, is unhappy with their agent or the broker. And they want to get out of the contract and work with you. And I caution you, do not coach them. Do not tell them how to get out of the contract, to call an attorney, to whatever. The only thing that we can do as realtors under the Code of Ethics is direct them back to the broker. That's all we can do. If we get into the issue, into the practice of coaching or making recommendations about what they should do, now we are getting involved, interjecting ourselves into an agency relationship or creating a tortious interference. So be very, very careful when somebody calls you that you do not give them advice on how to get out of a contract other than to say you really should talk to the agent's broker about this situation. That's it. Okay. A little bit over, but I think it was worth it. I hope I covered some things. Was running a little bit fast, but I think it was worth it. And thanks. See you next week.